Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Your Excellency, ambassadors, diplomats, distinguished guests, faculty members, students, and all of you who have joined us today in here, as well as those virtually joining us online. Welcome to the University of Tokyo. My name is Akira Igata, and I teach here at the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology, called RCAST, at the University of Tokyo. Many throughout history have declared that they were living in exceptional times. There's a famous saying that seems to be quoted every single year, that there are decades when nothing happens, and weeks where decades happen. It is true that we are prone to recency bias and to overstating the significance of the present. Having that said, the events of recent years leads us to believe that in this case, we may truly be living in one of those exceptional periods of our lives. In just a few short years, the world has undergone a seismic shift, arguably more profound than anything we have seen in the last 3 decades. The liberal international order is under strain. Multilateral cooperation is giving way to multipolar competition. The world seems to be searching for a new equilibrium, a rebalancing of power, if you will. The coming decade will likely shape the contours of the global order for the rest of the 21st century. In response to the shifting landscape, Asia and Europe are increasingly looking to one another to exchange perspectives, identify shared priorities, and explore new avenues for cooperation. And in this context, we are honored to host today's public symposium featuring a keynote address titled Geopolitics and the Transformation of the Multilateral Order by His Excellency Dr. Alexander Stubb, President of the Republic of Finland. And to open today's program, it is my great pleasure to invite to the stage the President of the University of Tokyo, Professor Teruo Fujii, for his welcome remarks. President Fujii, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Teruo Fujii, President of the University of Tokyo. It is a great honor to welcome His Excellency Dr. Alexander Stubb, President of the Republic of Finland, to the University of Tokyo here. So we are truly pleased to host this lecture today. Since the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1919, so Finland and Japan have built over a century of friendly ties in the fields of education, science, culture, and many others. And in recent years, international collaboration in advanced technology areas has emerged as a new and significant pillar of bilateral cooperation. The University of Tokyo itself has been actively deepening its engagement with various research institutions in Finland in order to contribute to such international collaboration. In fact, I was, it's been already maybe 12 years since, but I was co-directing the European lab in here, which involved VTT Finland. And that was in the frame of the Framework 7 program of the European program. That was 2012 to 2016. So, one of the highlights during these years is the Japan-Finland Beyond 5G and 6G joint seminar, which we co-hosted with Japan's Ministry of International Affairs and Communication and the Embassy of Finland, and to bring together experts from both countries on this area, high-speed communication. And at that seminar, Ms. Sanna Marin, Prime Minister of Finland at that time, delivered a keynote speech. And she emphasized the importance of further strengthening collaboration between our countries through partnership across public private, and academic sectors, grounded in our advanced technological capabilities and shared values. Another example took place just last month, in fact. Our university's innovation platform company, the U-Tokyo IPC, signed a memorandum of understanding with the University of Helsinki to establish a new framework for startup support between Europe and Japan. We expect this will greatly contribute to promoting international innovation in deep tech areas such as healthcare, AI, and clean tech. In this context, we are especially pleased to welcome President Stubb to the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology here for a timely lecture, which is titled Geopolitics and Transformation of the Multilateral Order. Because Finland is a global leader in advancing social inclusion, democracy, and sustainability, and has made significant progress in enhancing economic security and resilience under the concept of comprehensive security. So we hope we can gain insights for today's situation, which requires to address the challenges in economic security. And as U-Tokyo, we have a guiding principle which is called the U-Tokyo Compass. And this U-Tokyo Compass outlines key goals such as addressing global challenges, promoting diverse academic pursuits, and expanding our international engagement. And U-Tokyo has aimed at fulfilling our grand mission, which is to serve the global public. In today's world of growing geopolitical uncertainty with non-traditional security issues spanning various areas, it is imperative, especially for the universities, to integrate insights from different fields and to address these challenges through cross-border dialogue and collaboration. And I would like to mention that it is RCAST that has long served as a hub for precisely this kind of interdisciplinary and policy-oriented research addressing global issues. So today's event reflects the core of those initiatives, welcoming President Stubb, a leading expert in international politics, and engaging in this meaningful dialogue between Finland and Japan expresses our commitment to our mission to serve the global public through cross-border dialogues. And finally, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of you in attendance. With such a big audience, it is really wonderful to see all of you here. And I could see many also students here, so which is really nice. And this would be a really great opportunity for you to listen to President Stubb's lecture here. So this lecture is, by having said that, this lecture is already a great success already, and but I wish for further strengthening of cooperation between Finland and Japan. And thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Fujii. Now, to deliver another welcome message from our host institution, RCAST, I'd like to invite to the stage Director of RCAST, Professor Masakazu Sugiyama. Please come to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Masakazu Sugiyama, the director of this research institute, today hosting my excellency, the President of Finland, Dr. Alexander Stubb, and I would like to make a very short remark to welcome my greatest guest and also to welcome all the participants here. So my research institute, RCAST, as has been already partly introduced, a melting pot of the very diverse disciplines. Of course, the University of Tokyo is a real collection of the every discipline, which is root of the human development so far. But since the world is getting more complex, I'd like to just point out that this complex situation needs a real collection of the different disciplines to solve such a very profound and complex problem and provide us the very promising solution towards the brighter future. So, in that sense, my research institute, RCAST, is, as has been imagined from its name itself, kind of something like a very scientific research institute, science and technology. But actually, this is not just technology and science development, but also we are holding the very prominent researchers in policy and economy, and also the economic security or international security, as well as the people who are developing the technology and scheme for embodying the people who are, in some sense, handicapped, and also promoting the diversity and inclusion. So, in that sense, yes, the University of Tokyo is a very important entity to promote the brighter future, but I would say that the this research institute, RCAST, is a kind of some experimental place to make some initial trial to merge the different disciplines and bridge those different disciplines so that we can, provide a much better solutions against the problems which we are facing at. And I actually have a cheating paper since my colleague Igata has asked me to address something very important. So recently the RCAST has launched a very new unit of the International Economic Security Intelligence Lab. The name is very new, so I'd like to refer to my cheating paper. And my colleague Igata Sensei is a very pioneering and a powerful person to invite very world's prominent researchers and impactful person here and make a very important discussion. And today is, of course, a part of and also top of the list of such important events. And not only today's honorable guest, the President of Finland, but also we recently welcomed the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre to discuss on cutting-edge technology such as AI and quantum technology, as well as its relationship with economic security. And also, we welcome the Swedish Minister of Defense, Paul Jolson, to our annual Japan-NATO Symposium last December. And we also are very active in making lots of the relationships, including MOUs with a lot of countries such as the Czech Republic, Taiwan, Georgia, and South Korea. And of course, those are just a part of our activities, but we sincerely would like to develop such bilateral or multi-entity relationships to discuss about our future issues in light of our technologies and also the in-person relationships. Because even though the quite significant development in internet technology and social media has been changing our way of communication, but I do believe that our in-person and face-to-face communication and our friendship and also our trust is kind of the very important clue to provide us the sure solution to make this world more sustainable and more habitable. So to conclude my talk, we'd like to deepen our dialogue and collaboration with Finland in the near future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Director Sugiyama. Now, it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, His Excellency Dr. Alexander Stubb, President of the Republic of Finland. President Stubb is a seasoned statesman having served as a member of the European Parliament, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for European Affairs and Foreign Trade, Prime Minister, and Minister for Finance. He later served as the Vice President of the European Investment Bank and, until last year, directed the new School of Transnational Governance at the EUI, or European University Institute, before returning to national politics and being elected President of Finland. He is also a scholar of international relations, receiving a Ph.D. from the London School of Economics. In addition to these academic and political achievements, President Stubb is also an accomplished athlete. He was a member of the Finnish national golf team in his youth and plays golf often with President Trump in the US. He has competed in the Ironman World Championship. He even won first place in his age group at the European Triathlon Championship. So one might say he's something of a real-life Superman at this point. Today, in a moment of profound global uncertainty, we are truly privileged to hear from a leader at the heart of Europe's response, one whose singular background has shaped global affairs at the highest levels with both intellectual clarity and diplomatic dexterity. So please, join me in welcoming to the podium for his keynote address, President Stubb.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Mr. President, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to be here at the University of Tokyo today to give an address which basically tries to give an explanation what's going on in the world right now. I think the moderator gave us a quote that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. I think he failed to remind us that that quote is allegedly made by Vladimir Lenin. I actually use that quote quite a lot myself, so don't worry. A lot of people ask about the relationship between Japan and Finland, and I say, well, we're almost neighbors. There's just one country separating us. It's Russia. It's a little bit on the big side, but nevertheless. And interesting enough, if we look at our geopolitical challenges today, they are actually quite similar. Both countries are avid advocates of multilateral cooperation. Both countries, as noted, has Russia as a potential political threat, and you have a couple of additional ones to top it off. What I'll try to do today is to give you a tour de table or tour de horizon of what the world looks like in 2025. And I'll do it by giving you an introduction and then make 3 key points and then a conclusion. And this is a little bit of a pan out in the sense that I've just finished the manuscript of a book called The Triangle of Power, Rebalancing the New World Order. And I've been writing that book for the better part of 4 years, actually most of it written during my time in academic life. And interestingly enough, I started writing that book when President Trump finished his first term, and I sort of finished writing that book when President Trump started his second term. And by way of introduction, I want to make 2 points. I personally think that foreign policy is quite often based on 3 pillars. And they are values, interests, and power. And of course, values, they vary from country to country, but I could argue that Finland and Japan are very close. We believe in human rights, fundamental rights, liberal democracy, rule of law, and freedom, protection of minorities. So we are in a values-based alliance. Interests, they vary, depends on your geopolitics. But I could argue that from an interest perspective, Finland and Japan are very much in the same boat. Power, again, I would argue, is something that is the prerogative of big states like Japan, not so much small states as Finland. So instead of us having power, we try to have influence because we don't have the raw scale of power apart from obviously having one of the largest militaries in Europe. And right now, if we look at the shift in these three areas, you could really simplify and say that the United States is shifting from values to interests. It's always had power. Of course, you could argue that, well, you know, the US has always been interest-based in its foreign policy, but there has been an innate basis of values. China, again, is probably shifting from interests to power. Its value base is different, but it is becoming a major player. And Russia, again, is shifting from power to interests. In other words, it's losing the power base that it used to have in the previous century. And the rest of us are trying to make sense of this shift. Now, my second point is to say that when I started studying at Furman University in the United States in 1989, the world was quite different. It was the end of the Cold War. There was this sort of sense of hope in a new world order. Fukuyama's thesis of the end of history, I strongly believed in it, that basically all 200 nation states in the world would be sort of navigating or gravitating towards the best form of governance, which is liberal democracy, social market economy, and globalization. But of course, now the world is quite different. And I would argue that for you, young students here, this is very much your 1918, 1945, or 1989 moment. A moment when the world order is changing. And as the moderator noted, we don't know exactly where it's going to go. My own thesis is that it'll take 5 to 10 years for things to settle. And my own thesis is very similar to yours, that we're basically setting up a world order which might last to the end of the decade. And of course, we can get it wrong, as the leaders did after World War I. The League of Nations was a nice idea. It was there to contain multipolarity, but it wasn't strong enough. And we ended up in World War II. The United Nations, again, the leaders of the time got it right. I'm not saying for the right reasons, but they got it right. The UN and the bipolar world that was created after World War II maintained world peace. And then, of course, in 1989, when I was a student, I think we got a little bit intellectually lazy. We really expected, we made a presumption that everyone, through technology and other means, would gravitate towards open societies. But of course, we could argue that that was wrong. The reason I say that this is our 1918, 1945, or 1989 moment is that we saw a similar shift in 2022, more specifically on the 24th of February, 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine. Why don't I choose 9/11 or the downfall of Lehman Brothers or something else as a shifting the balance? Well, because for me that was the time when a member of the UN, permanent member of the UN Security Council, blatantly violated everything that the United Nations stands for, including the independence, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a state, namely Ukraine. And of course, we could argue that if that was the tipping point of a changing order and the end of the post-Cold War era, the election of President Donald Trump as President of the United States will accelerate this change. So here we go, my 3 points today. The first one is on order, the second one is on balance, and the third one is on dynamics. On the order, we in international relations, as you know, we have a tendency to over-rationalize the past, over-dramatize the present, and therefore underestimate the future. So we'll try to avoid, I think, that today. But a little bit of over-rationalization helps us to frame the world that we are in. And in my mind, the post-World War II order, or the Cold War, was quite clearly bilateral. So you had the Soviet Union and the United States, their allies, and then, of course, a group of non-aligned states somewhere in between. But bipolarity and a systemic rivalry of a collectivization of the economy versus capitalism, authoritarian regimes versus democracy, and then, of course, control versus freedom. And the battle was real. You know, there was this innate belief that perhaps communism will deliver better than capitalism. And the world was very clearly unbalanced in power politics between the United States and the Soviet Union. Then, of course, when the Cold War ended, and of course I'm jumping over 50 years of history here, the world became unipolar. It was the unipolar moment of world politics, which is actually quite rare. I mean, you've had a few empires throughout history that have run the world, more or less, but the capacity to do that was still, at the time, quite regional. But we did have this unipolar moment with the United States. I'd say that it lasted at least 10 years, up until 9/11, when there was this belief that perhaps the US will not be capable to continue unipolarity in the form in which it was. And the world started gradually to become multipolar. And I believe that now we live in a multipolar world order. Now, multipolar might sound attractive to some, but the truth is that, as you can see, it is quite chaotic. Because multipolarity often is not only based on agency for everyone, which in and of itself is good, but it's based on uncontrolled agency, and in many ways chaos. Multipolarity is very often about transactions, less about cooperation. It's more about à la carte or dog eats dog than rules, norms, and international institutions. So I think the battle of the order right now is between multipolar disorder or multilateral order. And of course, this is a simplification. It's an over-rationalization. But I think that's the actual battle that we are involved in at the moment. And as I said, I think it'll take about 5 to 10 years for things to settle. But we don't know. It could be longer or it could be shorter. And of course, the settling of the order can either be violent, which means through conflict and war, or it can be peaceful, which means through agreement. We'll come to my second point. What's then the balance? Well, in my mind, and again, this is a simplification and linked to the triangle of power. I think we have 3 spheres of interest. These are not poles as such. They are the global West, the global East, and the global South. Let me explain. The global West is roughly 50 countries, including, of course, North America, Europe, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, and a few others. Basically, countries that have been more or less allies since World War II, and basically countries that have set up the current international order that we have, including the UN, and through Bretton Woods, the IMF and the World Bank, later on GATT, and the World Trade Organization. So we were the ones who set up the current multilateral world order as it stands, including, of course, P5, so the permanent members of the UN Security Council. It was very much created in the image of the victors of World War II, with a values-based difference between the United States, the Soviet Union, China, and then, of course, France and Germany together with the United States. But this was the balance that maintained the world order for better or for worse. What unites us is values most of the time, and what unites us is interests most of the time, but what unites us is that we want to preserve the current order. Having said that, there is a big question mark. Will the United States continue to be the leader of the global West or not? And this is not only an academic question, but a real question? And my answer is, we don't know. And that, of course, is sometimes a little bit painful, but most of the times it's a great opportunity to try to understand and find out. The second sphere is the Global East. And in my mind, there, the hierarchy is quite clear. The leader is China, followed by Russia, which is utterly dependent on China at the moment. Technology, economy, military, you name it. And then followed by countries like Iran, North Korea, and others that vote with China in the UN. There are about 25 countries, a few more depending a little bit the time. Now, this is more an interest-based group rather than a values-based group. And their interest is common in that they want to change the current world order. They talk the language of multipolarity, trying to persuade the rest of the world that, listen, multilateralism is a Western concoction, and therefore you should go more for multipolarity. But it also means less international, less cooperative, and at the end of the day, I would argue, more transactional. And I'm not saying it's a good or bad value proposition, but the truth is, for some countries, it's very appealing. The third sphere of interest or grouping is the Global South. And here, I fully admit that lumping 125 countries together is unfair and a simplification. But let me explain. I personally believe that it's the Global South that is going to decide the next world order. Right? So, if on one hand, you're the Global West, you want to preserve the multilateral world order, and on the other hand, you're the Global East, you want to go for multipolarity, the one who's going to be looking at both sides and at some stage taking a decision is the Global South. And in the Global South, you have a range of countries which I argue are pivotal, are big powers that will basically have the greatest impact or influence. India, obviously, as the most populated country with a rather attractive demographic curve. Indonesia, countries such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates in the Gulf and the Middle East. In Africa, countries such as Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. In Latin America, countries such as Argentina and Brazil, and then a neighbor of the United States in the form of Mexico. Of course, there are other players in the system as well, but these are countries that are either in G20 or in some cases also actually in G7, and they'll have a big impact of the way in which the world is going to tilt. And it's going to be this balance that decides the first point that I made, in other words, the order. My argument is that if the West wants to preserve the current multilateral order, it needs to change the power balance. So it needs to give agency to the Global South. We cannot anymore be in a situation whereby we say that, listen, the United Nations is the epitome of peace and the international institutions that we all rely on, but we have 5 countries that were seen as victors of World War II that actually have veto power in that system. So you need to have at least 1 seat for Latin America, at least 2 seats for Africa, at least 2 more seats for Asia in the UN Security Council. Because if you don't have agency, if you don't feel like you have power in an institution, you're not going to rely on it. So Global West, Global East, and Global South. My final and third point is about the dynamics. So the order is shifting, the balance is shifting, and what are the dynamics of this order and the balance? Well, again, 3. 1 is competition. Now, competition innately is a good thing. We all compete, right? States compete, regions compete, companies compete, universities compete. You know, it's innately a good thing because that makes you thrive. But the problem is that competition in today's world is not only technological competition, not only economic competition, but also geopolitical competition. And if geopolitical competition is not contained into some form of cooperation, it can actually become quite chaotic and easily spill over into the second dynamic, which is conflict. And my worry, of course, is that after the Cold War, a lot of the conflicts that we witnessed were local. They were basically civil wars. But now they have become regional, like Russia attacking Ukraine, or the implications of Israel and Palestine, or Sudan. And we're seeing an increasing number of these conflicts, which are regional, and not only that, quite inconsistent and quite often involving external influence. Not only from non-state actors, as was the narrative after 9/11, right? It was all about terrorist organizations and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the rest of it, but also now state actors meddling in. So if you don't contain competition, you end up in conflict. And of course, conflict can be local, regional, and in a worst case, global. And it's the global one that we have to avoid. And then we come to my third dynamic, which I hope we go towards, is cooperation. And I know intuitively, if you look at what's going on in the world right now, it doesn't exactly sort of shout cooperation at you. But here is where I come to my point about international institutions. If we want to preserve international institutions, norms, rules, and laws, we need to change the power balance in these institutions. Otherwise, we're not going to have control for lack of a better world. And here's where I come to my conclusion before we go into Q&A. I personally think that we have three possible scenarios. And sorry for the threes here, but that's the only way I keep my sort of mind straight. The first is a world of disorder. And that's kind of what we're experiencing right now. It's a very transactional world. We see an emergence of conflict. We see different types of deals being made in the Middle East. We see different types of deals being made in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in North America, and Latin America. So there's very little sort of control of the system as such. If I want to look at a silver lining in a world of disorder, it'll lead to increased regional cooperation. So actually, when you see that the world is disorderly, you sort of come closer to home to roost. And you decide that, I want to strengthen ASEAN, I want to strengthen the European Union, I want to strengthen Mercosur, I want to strengthen ECOWAS, etc., etc. So in that world of disorder, and with a lack of a power center, in other words, the United States, the US will be circumvented and we'll see more sort of regional cooperation. So there's no one in control of the world, not that anyone ever was, but this will lead to more regional cooperation. The second possibility or scenario is a concert of powers, which is not very far from what we saw in the 1800s, with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and with France and with Germany, UK, and the rest of it. Now, it might be appealing. So let's say hypothetically that there's a concert of power, the United States, China, Russia, perhaps India, we don't know, where they sort of tolerate difference and then make transactions. But my point is that at the end of the day, it is so interest-driven that when the interests of two big powers in a concert of powers clashes, you actually end up in war again. So not necessarily my preferred choice. I don't know where Japan would be in a concert of powers, but perhaps that's for discussion. And then finally, the third scenario is a new multilateral order. And the new multilateral order would be one where the power balance has been shifted to reflect 2025 or the 2020s more than 1945 or the 1950s. But that will require, of course, compromise from so many different quarters. So as an avid scholar of international relations, I find this interregnum, or this in-between period, extremely interesting as a source of research. But at the same time, as the President of the Republic, I try my best to navigate in this. And from a Finnish perspective, we rely on interests, on values and interests. And instead of power, we try to have impact with different types of players. But that then for us means that we have to reach out not only to like-minded countries like Japan or like Sweden, I think to a broader world as well. So these were my 2 cents on a changing geopolitical world order and where it might go. And I wanted to give you a brief introduction claiming that this is the 1918, 1945, 1989 moment of our generation, and at the same time give a couple of ideas of what is, number one, the order, the balance, and the dynamics of the world. And we have these 3 scenarios. Let's hope we land on the last one. Thank you very much.
President Stubb, thank you so much for that majestic overview, and it was very coherent with your 3 points and 3. You're known in your country as you have these memes focusing on 3 things, 3 points, and I was able to see this firsthand, so that was fantastic. Maybe I want to delve a little bit more on your concept of these 3 different spheres from Global West, Global East, and Global South. Let me start with the Global West. I think, as you mentioned, there are many in Japan who feel that the US is no longer trying to play the role of the leadership in the Global West or in the world that they used to have in the past, which means that someone else has to take up the slack. Yes, that would probably mean that we need to cooperate among like-minded countries to try and prop up some of the things that the US used to do, from international society to international institutions to values and so on. But what do you think is the focal point for this new leadership within the Global West? Is it different countries looking at their niche advantages and filling some of the holes that the US has made? So in a way, a new type of burden sharing of this new world order? Or should we look for a new focal point? You mentioned the potential creation or changes in the UN Security Council, but there are also probably an option for us to, let's say, look at the new relationship between the CPTPP, EU, and ASEAN that seems to be growing. I mean, that's an international economic order among like-minded countries that comes together, which doesn't necessarily include the US or China. So what would be the thing that would prop up this new order that's not led by the US in the Global West, in your opinion?
Yeah. That's okay. All right, no worries. So let me give you 2 answers. The first one is specific to the U.S. I mean, as an avid scholar of U.S. history and I guess presidential history as well, I would argue that from time to time there's a president in the United States that changes the direction of the country. I mean, it's part of democracy. That's why we elect people. And if you take in the sort of macro scheme of things, I'd argue that Franklin D. Roosevelt was one. So he gets the US engaged again. He believes that the US needs to be taking a leading role in the world. And of course, domestically, he drives through the New Deal. And subsequent American presidents, whether Republicans or Democrats, followed that suit. A second president that did this was, of course, Ronald Reagan. And remember, Ronald Reagan in his early days, a lot of people in the West and the rest of the world were quite skeptical. They were thinking, who is this actor that comes in here and does he know what he's doing, etc., etc. But then suddenly, with the wisdom of hindsight, Reaganomics drives through the whole American establishment so that Democratic presidents such as Bill Clinton and Obama basically follow that same economic model, and also very strong engagement internationally. And that we could see with George Bush elder and then George W. Bush the older. Now, my argument is that already in 2016, Trump changed American foreign policy. It was a phrase copied from Reagan, America first, because he was, of course, the first one who used that phrase. And Biden followed suit. Yes, the style was different, but, you know, things such as the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, it's pure America first protectionism. So it's not that, you know, Reaganomics drive anymore. And now, of course, Trump has put in, you know, the next level of things. So then you have to ask yourself, what do you do about it? And this is my second answer. What do you do in the West? Well, I have always believed that you have to base your foreign policy on reality, how the world is, rather than how you want the world to be like. So I could be all nostalgic and say, listen, 1989 was fantastic. So, you know, the Berlin Wall came down, 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed, in 1995 Finland joined the EU, and you know, I remember reading books at US universities about Japanese patchwork protectionism, you know, and the rest of it. You remember how the early 1990s, but that's not how the world is anymore. So you have to deal with the world as it is. And then you ask yourself of the question, okay, how do we impact it? Now, I think there are two ways that you do it. One is that you have good state relations, so that's the bilateral relationship, in our case, Finland, the US. And the other one is the personal relationship, so that you forge a good personal relationship with the President of the United States. And then we come to the crux of your question. Who will then take leadership if the US doesn't do it? Well, I think there's a big question mark there still. But what we're seeing now is more European leadership. And nothing sort of unites Europe more than a common enemy, which is not the US, but Russia. But then if the US wants Europe to take more responsibility, they seem to be doing that. And then we come to Asia, who takes Japan. You know, it's very clear. And suddenly I also see this sort of, you know, hearts flying across Japan and Europe like this. And it's getting to become a much closer relationship, whether it's trade or otherwise. So when we see that the big power is leaving a power vacuum, then suddenly we find ourselves, you know, I look at you and say, I think we should cooperate a bit more, don't you? So this is what I think we'll start seeing. So it'll be more patchwork, perhaps less leadership as such, but I do not for 1 second believe that we should be worried about American withdrawal from the global West. I still think that they will stay engaged, also, although the engagement is a little bit different.
You talked about the importance of this personal relationship. You have been on camera playing golf with President Trump, talking with him in different international events. In your personal conversations with him, and of course to the extent that you can disclose, do you think that there is a possibility that the US will stay engaged with the global West as we move forward in a sort of a shift in rebalance within the global West?
Well, I think, you know, I mean, if you take the bigger scheme of things, there's nothing, you know, very different in the one-on-one conversations about the direction than what you see, you know, in the public. And that's why I think the only thing that I can humbly do, coming from a small country, is to try to make arguments, say, about what to do in Ukraine, or what to do with tariffs. And it's great to have that possibility for a dialogue. But what I do think is that we're seeing in America, which is much more transactional than before. And that means that, you know, there'll be transactions in the Middle East, there'll be transactions on Ukraine, there might be transactions on Europe, there are transactions on China, there might be transactions with Japan. So we have a president who is driven by deals, and he talks about that a lot in public and in private as well. And then you have to ask yourself a question, well, is foreign policy about deals and transactions, Or is it more about compromises and cooperation? And then we try to find a middle ground there. But I do not believe that the United States is withdrawing from the global West. And if you want to epitomize an institution where that it holds true, I think is NATO. I mean, there's not one intervention that I've heard from the American administration or from President Trump that they would be withdrawing. At the same time, they are going to pivot more to the Indo-Pacific, which actually, from a Japanese perspective, might be a good thing. So, you know, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's a different type of administration right now, and we deal with it. Finland is in a lucky position in that, you know, we have a lot to give in this relationship with the US. You know, we build 60% of the world's icebreakers, we design 80% of them, and President Trump has publicly stated that he needs icebreakers. We have extremely advanced military technology, a cooperation that we're working on here during this trip as well. I have a lot of tech and defense companies in tow with me. So there are a lot of opportunities there. And then, of course, you know, we kind of cover the US back with just having doubled NATO's border with Russia. So, you know, we have a lot of things to give. And a final point, you know, networks are very important. And of course, there are only two Western big networks, which are Nokia and Ericsson, and the US certainly doesn't want Huawei. So, you know, I think we're in a good place.
Maybe a last question before we open up to the floor. You talked about how there's hearts flying between Europe and Japan, and there's probably a lot of different things we can continue doing and also engage in new initiatives. For example, you talk about icebreakers. President Trump has created a new office of shipbuilding in the White House, and now the Japanese government is thinking about investing more in shipbuilding, working more towards icebreakers with US, which means that perhaps the ICE agreement, the icebreaker agreement that you signed with ICE Pact, with Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden back then, perhaps Japan can join that pact as well. Or look at undersea cables. You have Baltic Seas undersea cables, East Asian undersea cables being cut by these shadow fleets, or all of these critical and emerging technologies on AI, quantum, bio, and so on that both countries have. Maybe there's a way to cooperate on joint research. What do you see is the most fruitful areas of cooperation between Japan and Finland or Japan and Europe, given all of these potential opportunities that we see in the future at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to say that I think what we're now starting to see is this emergence of both holy and unholy alliances. And by that I mean to say that, you know, if the center doesn't hold in the UN, we start seeing things such as the Quad. So India, Japan, the US. We start seeing things such as AUKUS, Australia, the UK, and the US on nuclear submarines. And I think here in the region, you'll probably start seeing some mini quads as well with, you know, Japan, Philippines, you know, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, we don't know. And then we're probably going to start seeing some kind of, I don't know, quad type of cooperation between European countries and Japan. You know, I was just speaking with my ambassador on the way here, Tanja Jääskeläinen, that for us, Japan in the olden days was more about, okay, let's go there and cooperate on business. Past 2-3 years, it's really about let's cooperate on security and defense. And this is a big shift. So that's probably one area where you'll see a lot of European countries wanting to cooperate. And of course, we are in a situation whereby, for the first time since the Cold War, we're increasing defense expenditure. And that will be an opportunity, I think, for more cooperation. You know, whether we like it or not, it's a reality. So now, you know, there's talk inside the alliance, NATO, that we will set a target of defense expenditure 3.5 plus 1.5%, 3.5 hard defense, 1.5 more infrastructure type of defense expenditure by year X, Y, and Z. So again, this gives a big opportunity. These types of figures we had last time in 1985 during the Cold War. So a lot of things that I think we can cooperate on satellites, etc., etc.
Thank you so much. I think the many things that you just identified is seen in the eyes of economic security in Japan, from cooperation with technology on satellites to MDAs to supply chains to critical infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to all this cooperation between Japan and Finland and Europe materializing in the near future. So with that, let me open up to the floor. I know there will probably be a lot of questions. I'll pick up 2 or 3 at a time. If you have a question, please put your hands up, identify yourself, and most importantly, please keep your questions short and to the point. So once again, if you have any questions, please put your hands up. And we have a lot of hands, so I'm going to try and pick ones which look like students. So we'll go with one, a student from right there, and then we'll go to a student right here next, and lastly, we'll go from someone over here. Okay, you with the glasses. So one, two,
you expect that I have a really good memory, but fortunately I have an Ed de Camp who has my notebook and my pen, so it's okay, you can start.
Go ahead.
素晴らしいご講演大変ありがとうございました。自分の方から質問したいと思うんですけど、ですね、最近台湾有事という形で、今後、戦争が起こるんじゃないかっていう予測がされていて、それに付随する、米中戦争また日中戦争に近いような形のものも起こると思われます。その中で日本がどういう立ち位置で振る舞わなければいけないのか、そして、国民一人一人がどういう思いを持って日本また世界というところに貢献しなければいけないのかっていうところ、何か教えていただきたいなと思います。
So his question was that Taiwan contingency is being talked about a lot in these days, and he's wondering what type of role Japan should play, how Japanese people should be facing these kind of difficulties. So that's question 1. And then we had a question from a gentleman in the front.
僕高校生なんですけど、少し国と国の関係とかではなくて個人的な質問をさせていただきたいです。高校生が国とか世界を変えるために何かできることってありますでしょうか。
誰が変えるんですか。
はい。
高校生。
すいません。
Okay, so the second question was actually a high school student, and he asked, what can high schoolers do to change the world? And then last one.
I'm Ken Shimizu, and I'm researching Swedish foreign policy as well as Nordic politics. And the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force has decided to introduce the Patria AMV, the Finnish equipment for the ground defense and mobility. And it means that we will have common equipment for our defense. And it is reportedly that Finland and Japan continue to cooperate in the field of defense, and both countries are now negotiating regarding defense agreement concerning transfer of defense equipment and technology. I would ask how Finland and Japan will deepen their relationship in the future diplomatically and militarily for the new multilateral order in global West and in the new order. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks a lot. So I'll start in order. First, the Taiwan question, which is of course extremely complex. I had the chance to spend 3.5 hours with President Xi Jinping on a state visit to Beijing last October. And of course, we discussed Taiwan as well. And my take is that from a diplomatic perspective, it's always important to state one China policy, and then to be engaged in a general conversation. I think a lot of it's not going to be so much about what Japan can do, but what will the United States do. I think this is going to be one of the litmus tests of the current US administration. What is their take on Taiwan and how are they going to deal with it? I try to deal with it as diplomatically as possible, step by step, and I think that's usually the best way. The good thing with Chinese foreign policy is that it's always quite predictable. And unlike Russian foreign policy, it's not rash. So you kind of know where the Chinese are going and when they're going, and that means that you can be engaged in having a dialogue. And I would argue that there is clearly a Chinese charm offensive going on right now to a lot of the countries in the region and elsewhere in the world. And I think it's a very smart move. And I'm not talking about charm offensive just with the Belt and Road Initiative and other things, but in general, I think China is playing their cards strategically right. They are actually, in some cases, promoting more cooperation and free trade and rules, etc. But it's very deep in the Chinese DNA to talk about sort of non-interference in national matters. So very much a careful balance there. Now, high school student. It's an excellent question because my answer is very simple. You can never outsource influence or agency. And whether you're a high school student or whether you're a university student, you can choose either to be in the sidelines and just look at the world changing in front of your eyes and sometimes complain about it. I don't want the world to look like this. Or then you can have impact. And my argument is always that in foreign policy, you should not be passive. I'm not saying that you need to become a radical activist, but I think, reading, writing, discussing, and putting forward your own ideas, that is what changes the world. The worst enemy, I think, of democracy is passivity. When you sort of withdraw yourself from the system and say that, there's too much noise, I can't bear with it. Just let the world go as it is. So please, be active. And if you're a high school student, study international relations at the University of Tokyo. That's right. And then finally the question on sort of Finnish-Japanese defense or security cooperation. That's kind of what we're doing here right now. And I don't think it's a secret, or is it what we're signing tomorrow? We're signing a strategic partnership. Yeah. We're updating a strategic partnership statement, which will include a lot of the cooperation that we do. But as I always say, then it's up to the companies actually to do the deals, whether it's Patria or whether it's ICEYE, which provides satellites, or other companies that we have here in tow. But just to hammer the point, the chief of the Japanese Defense Forces was in Finland for 2 to 3 days a couple of weeks ago, and that was not something that would have happened, in the olden days, or Finland wasn't exactly on the list of the chief of defense of the Japanese armed forces. But we're seeing a lot of cooperation happening for many reasons. One of them is that our circumstances is the same. May I just add that, when I spoke to the chief of defense, I said, I realize that Finland has one security threat, and that's Russia. But Japan has kind of 3, So your situation is a little bit more challenging, as they say.
So we're actually already out of time. Can we take one more round of questions, or do we need to go? Very quick.
I think we're having lunch next, so.
Okay, so very quick, one more round of questions. Please put your hands up. I know we have one person in the audience who's Finnish and studying in Japan, so we'll start with them. We'll go with the lady in the front. And then one last question. We have a big hand from a gentleman right there. So the one with the glasses, we'll go number 3 with you. So first, let's start with our Finnish student from right there in the front.
Yes, Moikka Alex. As a Finnish national, but a master's student here in Japan, I wanted to ask you a question about global trends in immigration policy. So Finland and Japan, along with many other countries, are facing huge demographic shifts towards an older population. Now, one alleviating solution for this is promoting work-based immigration. This is something Finland is currently doing pretty actively by having meetings like right now and signing agreements with foreign representatives. However, with the general global trend of rising nationalism and in terms of competition versus cooperation, which you mentioned. Do you see most other countries with the same aging issue turning to immigration as a big part of the solution, or will they more so look for domestic solutions?
Thank you. And then we'll go with the lady in the front right there.
Thank you for your lecture. I'm very honored. I study international relations as a master's student, and I want to ask something from your keynote speech. So you've said that the Global South will have a critical role in deciding the next world order, but I think the world order that we are hoping, the multilateral form, actually the Global West is kind of shifting away from it in some ways, in some positions toward conflicts. And how do you think the Global West in the future could stand against this? And how do you think the Global South can exercise its agency in a very in a world with lots of gaps and differences? Thank you.
And then one last question from our gentleman with the glasses down there.
Hi, thank you very much. Actually, I'm a journalist. I'm Kenji from Nikkei. I want to follow up on China. You mentioned about the sort of new orders or new rules and international institution. What is your evaluation of like institutions like AIIB, which was made by China, and also this new arbitration agency that China just established in Hong Kong with about 30 countries signed up for it? Is this something that you're sort of envisioning where new order, new membership on the international institution like this? And also, you mentioned about how China is sort of predictable, unlike Russian. I've been watching China for a long time, and I see a moment where China could be rash like Russia in a way. And how would you please elaborate on that point, where how Russia is rash, but China is not rash and rational? Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think he's interviewed before. You've interviewed before, right? We've had an interview before, right?
Tomorrow.
Good. All right. 2. There you go. Okay, great. I think, again, excellent questions. I think the first question was about global trends in immigration, and especially work-based immigration. And as you well know, in Finland, the president runs foreign policy in cooperation with the government, and it's basically the government that does immigration policy. So I will only give a broad answer. I think there are not too many examples in the history of mankind where the greatness of a nation has not been based on immigration. And this could shift. And there we come to the demographic curve. How does the United Kingdom maintain its mid-power status? Immigration. How has the United States become a superpower? Immigration. What is the biggest challenge for China? Demography and the lack of willingness to have immigration. How about the smaller powers that have an impact in the Gulf region, like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, based on immigration? Where will India go in its demographic curve? Well, it'll be able to sustain population growth internally for a while, but probably it will need immigration. And of course, if you look at the PIN code of the world, in other words, the demographics, in the beginning of this century, it was pretty much 1114. So 1 billion in the Americas, 1 billion in Europe, 1 billion in Africa, and 4 billion in Asia. By the end of this century, the demographic curve will be 1145. The 4 will be Africa, and the 5 will be Asia. So, if I was a Westerner in Europe or in the United States, I'd be looking at that trend very carefully and see what you can do about it. But we need to soften up, the sort of public perception, because as you said, a lot of people are going native right now and rejecting immigration because of that. So a lot of work to be, I think, done there. Then the question of, the global West shifting away from the multilateral order. and how will the global south get agency? Well, this is why in the book, my message is to the global west is to say that, listen, if you don't pick your act, if you don't, change your mindset, and the mindset means, one, start cooperating and having dialogue with the global south rather than lecturing and having a monologue. And if you don't compromise with the power of the institutions, you're going to lose the global south. And the truth is, from a demographic and other perspective, development perspective, that's where the future lies. So the question is, do we in Europe or elsewhere want to become, pensioners who nostalgically think about our cultural heritage and great history, or do we want to be engaged? So it's a change of, I think, a mindset. Of course, it's easy for me to say because, I come from a country which hasn't had a colonial past. Of course, unless you believe that, we gave Sweden independence in 1809, or we gave Russia independence in 1917. But that wasn't the case. It was the other way around. So I can, make this claim quite easily. Then on China and the institutions. Now, my first observation is to say, just in general, the AIIB, and I have met them, is a nice multilateral bank, but I think it's quite small so far. You compare that to the EIB, which is the biggest multilateral bank in the world. It's actually 3 times bigger than the World Bank and 10 times bigger than the EBRD. However, there's a trend and a pattern there. When a power vacuum emerges, someone else will fill it. And what I predict happening now with, Chinese development is that you start seeing these alternatives to Western institutions and even to Western currency, such as the dollar. So that's why we start seeing arbitration agencies. That's why we start seeing BRICS. There's nothing that unites BRICS in terms of values, but interest. And of course, now it's BRICS Plus, with I think 19 countries that have applied for membership in it. So what you see is when the West is not capable anymore of managing the world order, and if the United States retracts itself from it, then alternatives start to merge. Now, difference between China and Russia, I still say it's day and night. With China plays the long game. And China is not only an emerging superpower, but it actually is a superpower. So it doesn't need to show its muscle, whereas Russia is a declining superpower. And that's why its behavior is not only imperialist, but also rash. I mean, who would have predicted that Russia would go for a full-scale attack to Ukraine in 2022? The size of the Russian economy, it's smaller than Italy, only slightly bigger than Spain. And it's the largest and most natural resource-rich country in the world with the demographic curve that's going down. So it's almost this sort of last gasp of Russian imperialism that we are seeing. Whereas with China, the approach is completely different. A century is a page in the history book of China. So that's why I think that their behavior is much more systematic. And when I had conversations with President Xi, I asked him, okay, what's your system? How do you prepare? He says, once a month, we make sure that the goals that we have set for the year are there. Once a week, we get together with the committee to go through every detail. We set a strategy and then we stick to it. So it's very unlikely that China will do something, off the top of its head. It's something that has been planned for a long time. That's why, by the way, if I may, I was a little bit surprised at the immediate reaction of China to Trump's original tariffs on China. There, actually, Europe played the long game. Right? Europe said, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's see what we do. Whereas China started to go for tit-for-tat tariffs. Okay, subsequently then they have come down and negotiations have taken place. But China is much, much more predictable than Russia. And I would still argue, if I may, well, I will not make a statement on China, but the basic DNA of Russia is imperialism. The whole existence of the Russian Empire has always been built on land acquisition. And the stated goal of President Putin is Ruski Mir, Greater Russia with borders from the 1800s, which means one Russia, one religion, one language, and one leader. And I don't see similar type of behavior coming from China. So it's a different kettle of fish.
President Stubb, thank you so much for candor and insightful responses. This concludes our symposium. We ask you to please remain seated while we escort the President and his crew outside. But while doing so, please join me with a warm round of applause for his time and his answers.